video, and in the next couple of videos we'll cover a couple of basic problems, and we'll try to see can we write a program to solve these problems with what we already know, just using the knowledge we acquired in the previous videos. So all the problems we already are, I briefly mentioned them, so we are already a little familiar with them, but I'll just define them more precisely. So the first problem will be, given an integer, calculate the sum of all integers starting from 1 to that given integer. That's the first problem. The second one will be counting the boxes of orange juice in the fridge. So we have different types of boxes in the fridge, or different flavors of juice, and we need to count the boxes which have orange juice in them. So that's the second problem. And the last one is, the third one is square root. So given an integer number, calculate the square root of that number. So these are the three problems we'll cover in the next video, so this video and the next two, and we'll start with the sum of integers. So let's start typing. So again, we'll assume no particular programming language. We'll just use pseudocode, which means we'll try to write an imitation, let's say this way, of the source code for now, and let's see how if we can solve this problem or not. So I'll just type the problem here, right? So given an integer n, calculate the sum of all integers from 1 to n. So the way we think about this problem is, what are our inputs, what we need to output, right? So apparently we have only one input, which is number n, and the output should be another one number, which is the sum of all these numbers from 1 to n. So as I mentioned previously, there is this formula where we can say sum, let's just denote it sum 1 to n, right? And we can say this equals n times, so we'll use all the operator notations that we learned in the previous video in operators. So this is multiplication, so n times n plus 1 divided by 2. So this is an easy formula which gives you the sum of all numbers from 1 to n. And if we want to write the program, remember we introduced this hypothetical two keywords, input and output, which would let us get the user input and then print something on the screen. So we'll just rely on those for a little while more before we get to know the actual commands that we can use for inputting, for getting input and for outputting. So we can just, the first thing, input, right? We need to get the input from user. So let's say we'll take, and let's assume we have like statically typed language, so we'll assign types to variables. So we'll take int and say n, right? We can declare, and then we can say, I don't remember how we said we'll use this, but let's assume we do input n, right? Or another way of using this and more explicit would be, let's just say input. Let's just do this way. So this means line number 5 means we have declared a new variable of type integer, and then the value of that variable is coming from a user input, right? So after this line executes, n has some specific value. And we assume we don't need any validations. We assume everything is correct. So whatever the user always inputs an integer number. So at this point we have this number, and then what we need is some place to store the result, right? And we can say, and since we know that the sum of integers is always an integer, we can assume it's still an integer. I'll cover later why we assume this and why in some cases it might not be. But let's say in sum, let's call it sum, and then we'll just do the same formula, right? So we can do n times n plus 1, and then divided by 2, right? So this is the program. Now we have the result in sum. All we need to do is say output sum, right? So this is, so just having the simple knowledge of variables and operators, we wrote the program. So apparently if you pick a specific language, this will look a little bit differently, right? All these keywords, the input and output will be replaced by some other commands or function calls, but overall you'll still have the same 3 lines and the formula will not change for sure. Let's see what I wanted to say about this. So yeah, one thing, just note the parentheses here. So if we don't have this, it's the multiplication always has higher precedence, so this will be n squared plus 1 instead of n squared plus n, which we need. That's why we had parentheses. And also actually in this case it would be n squared plus 0.5, so half, right? Because 1 divided by 2. Division is also higher precedence than addition. So that's why basically we do this. And yeah, this gives us the solution. So so if you don't know why this is the sum, you can look it up on the web. I don't want to spend much time on explaining. This is really simple. I hope you know. Another thing why I mentioned that we assume this is an integer, because remember that every type comes with associated size of memory, right? So if we declare a variable of type int, it would be, as we remember, it would be, usually it would be 32 bits, so 4 bytes, right? And 4 bytes or whatever size of memory can fit some limited maximum number, right? And if we take n, if n is a very, very large number, then summing up all, even though n can fit in this one integer variable, summing up all the variables from 1 to n might not fit. So this will result in what is called an overflow. We don't need the details now, but basically the value won't fit in the memory block, and it's basically you will get some undefined value in it, or some languages might, some compilers might warn, actually not compilers, you might get some error at runtime. Okay, so this is one way to write this. It's good that we can at least solve some problem with the current knowledge, but let's assume we don't know this formula, right? So let's assume, yeah, I'm just in the 2nd grade. I don't know how to, I only know how to add 2 numbers. I don't know any formula for getting this sum directly. So here I'll type, consider this, we'll talk about comments, but for now know that this is a comment, and it means something in the source code that the compiler will ignore. So this is not part of the program, but just write a comment here. I'll say we know the formula. Okay, so the second case is we don't know the formula. So if we don't know the formula, the simplest way to go is just add all the numbers and then return the result. So the first line never doesn't change because we still need that input, and then we get sum, and we start from 0 because we didn't add anything, right? And then so what we need to do is add 1, right? Because the first integer to add is 1. So we can say sum equals sum plus 1. Okay, so now we have 1. So now we need to add 2, but do we know if n is larger than 2 or smaller? So we don't know, right? Let's assume n is something closer to 10 at least. So we can say sum is sum plus 2, sum is sum plus 3. So at this point we can say we have already 6 in sum, right? The value of sum is now 6. So as you can see, we have a problem here. It's first, we don't know when to stop, right? And which also means we don't know how many to add, right? If n is 1, we just stop here on the first line and that's it. Or if we consider 0 as a valid input, then we don't even need to add any of this. So the question here is, so let's do this ellipsis and then say how many we should add, right? Because we don't have the formula, we just need to add, but we don't know how many, right? So we know we need to add n, right? But at the time of writing program, we don't know what's the value of n, so we cannot write n rows. Whatever you write, the n can change. So this is one problem. So with the current knowledge, we basically don't know how to calculate this. So for that we need something else, something more. And basically we need a way to repeat this operation of adding a fixed number of times, right? In this case n times. And also another thing we need, actually no, that's enough. If we can add exactly n times by modifying what we add, that's good enough. So that we don't know how to do yet. We'll cover that in the upcoming video. So let's just stop here. This is, I think, a good conclusion that we can solve if we know the formula. If we don't know, we're still missing some key features of the programming languages, basic features, but important ones, and we basically cannot solve this with what we know now. So let's come back to this problem after a couple more videos and see how we can improve this or how we can solve this. So this was the first problem. So in next video, let's discuss the second problem, which is the count boxes of orange juice. Right, okay, so let's go to the next one.